Ball pythons are some of the most commonly kept pet snakes in the whole reptile hobby. But the way that many of us have been keeping these guys for a long time could be killing them sooner than they should die. So today we're going to talk about whether or not we're feeding ball pythons all wrong. But before we get into it, make sure you subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Here we go. Today's video was inspired by episode 90 of the Animals at Home podcast, which is hosted by Dylan Perrin. Just a really good podcast if you're looking to up your reptile keeping. There's all sorts of episodes about various topics, and you can definitely learn a lot to help better take care of your animals. Episode 90, the guest on that episode was Dan LIEBEL. LIEBEL, I believe is how it's pronounced. The main topic was Dan had a snake named Samantha, who's a Burmese python, who passed away from a heart attack at 22 years old. Now, first of all, I want to be very clear, this isn't, and no hate to him, right? Because a lot of people would make the same kind of mistake, and a lot of people have and are currently making the same mistake. He was just being vulnerable with an experience that he had that could help improve us as reptile keepers as a whole. So nothing but respect to him. That's not what this is about. 22 years old, for most conventional pets that we know of, is a long time, but a snake like a Burmese python can live a lot longer than that, to be honest, if we're keeping them correctly, if they have perfect conditions. So the issue that Samantha had was she was overfed. She was overweight, morbidly obese, arguably, and a lot of snakes are, especially big snakes. I'm going to apply these same rules to ball pythons because they're slow metabolism constrictor snakes. These rules don't exactly apply to every snake, like corn snakes or hognose snakes that have faster metabolisms, but they can be applied to these slow-moving, slow metabolic rate snakes like ball pythons. I think the main issue, how this became such a problem and how it continues to be such a problem, is that I'm not saying that there aren't ethical ball python breeders. I plan on breeding Billy one day, but based on what we're going to talk about today, it might be a lot longer until we do that. Because a lot of these breeders, they get a bunch of snakes, right? And they're not as concerned about the care and the health of the animal as they are of getting it to a breeding weight, getting a nice big snake so that they can breed it faster turnaround, babies quicker, and all that stuff. So for this reason, they're feeding large meals more often than arguably they should. And then another issue, if you're looking at animals just for a profit, is you want to save space, right? And you don't want to spend a whole bunch of money on their enclosure. So a lot of the times these beautiful snakes that get to a decent size, not huge snakes, but they shove them in these tiny little tubs, like oftentimes an adult female, which Billy is still a sub-adult, not quite full grown yet. They'll shove them into a tub like roughly the size that we have our leopard geckos in, a 32-quart tub. I don't know if you know this, but a leopard gecko that gets like 10 inches arguably could use bigger than 32 quarts, but you're definitely pushing it when you're putting a 4 or 5 foot snake in that same size enclosure and just calling it good. So Billy has actually been fasting for a little while because this is something I've been thinking about for a little bit now, even before I heard this podcast, but this podcast it gave me some more info on it and just something that I want to talk about, right? Because I'm not going to do a feeding guide. I'm definitely not the authority on how to keep these beautiful beasts, but I definitely do think that these are good things to keep in mind when feeding and raising up your ball python. When they're young and they're growing, they're going to put that food right to use as opposed to depositing it as just plain old fat, right? So I'm not saying that you can't feed your baby ball python every week. With Billy closing in at about 2 years old now, and I was feeding her every week, and the meals were just starting to get bigger. I just bumped up her food size. We're gonna take a step back. We're gonna go slower, maybe once every 2, maybe even 3 weeks for this beautiful beast, and we'll talk about why. The first factor that we should keep in mind is simply genetic variability. Every individual is going to be different. Yes, you can make rules of thumb for the species, and you'll probably be okay following those because the species is the species. But think about people, right? My buddy in high school that wrestled with me, he was just a string bean, man. He could eat a gallon of ice cream and literally not gain any weight. Me, I eat a gallon of ice cream, I'm gonna look like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, you know what I'm saying? So that's just the first factor that we need to keep in mind, is that all individuals are different. So it's better to know the body condition that you're shooting for and know and get in tune with your individuals. Something to look out for as far as body condition goes is, and you can see maybe it's just the fast that's helping, and also like I said, she is growing, so this isn't quite as much of a big deal as if she was a full-grown adult, but you see how her spine there, it comes to that peak, and right now it's against my finger, so it's kind of cheating, right? So she's getting a little more of a peak, but even there you can see what you're really looking out for. What a sign of a really obese ball python is going to be a valley there instead of a peak, because that means all that fat is pushing those ribs out, and that's a really overweight snake, where I still think Billy might be slightly overweight now. It's definitely not as bad as some ball pythons that you've seen. Another thing is right here, and this is what I don't like. You see how it just kind of, it cuts from her body to her tail, like a little too much right there. It's getting a lot better because we've been more careful, but you can see how it goes from this plump body and then it just shoots down to that little tail. So that's something else to look out for. The next factor is going to be their activity level. Now, we don't see Billy move whatsoever. Now, that's not to say that she literally doesn't move. Probably when we go to bed, right? These guys are nocturnal. Humans are primarily diurnal, depending on your lifestyle, I guess. But so I'm pretty confident that she's cruising around in the middle of the night when no one's in here. It's nice and dark, nice and quiet for her. But as opposed to that, Trips, our male ball python, he cruises like all the time. He's constantly moving around and whatnot. And with that, you know, Trips eats every week, and he eats proportionally like the same size as we were feeding Billy. But when you hold him, he feels not hollow as in like he's starving, but he feels light, he feels lean. Billy feels like a ton of bricks, if we're going to be honest. And she's just a big plumper. We need to consider that when feeding them, and probably get them off of the same schedule and not just look at, oh, it's whatever, Saturday, they got to eat. A good thing to do that we'll start implementing more with Billy is simply just pulling her out of the enclosure for exercise. Maybe letting her crawl around, letting her do various things. Because even right now, she's not moving too much, but this is way more than we ever see her move in her enclosure. Next is enclosure size, right? Look, if we just shove Billy into a little 32-quart tub, she's definitely not going to move, right? She's not even going to have the option to move, even when we're asleep, where she's probably doing her night cruising. So that's another thing you should consider. Things are getting better now in the reptile community, and we're realizing that these guys probably do need bigger enclosures. So the more space you provide, the more climbing opportunities, because yes, they are, maybe I wouldn't go as far as to say semi-arboreal, but they will take climbing opportunities when presented. So why not give it to them and let them get that chance to do some more exercise? It's also a form of enrichment, you know, it gives them something else to do. They're not on the ground, they get to climb up. And with that said, I know Billy's only in a 1 foot high. I think pretty soon here, Billy's going to have herself at least 2 feet of height to do some exploring. Another thing to think about is the diet that you're literally feeding them, right? Rodents are a great meal for a snake. Obviously, they take them readily, and there's nothing really wrong with that. But something we need to keep in mind is studies have found in fecal matter of ball pythons in the wild, they actually do eat a fair amount of avian prey, meaning birds, right? Birds are going to be a lot less fat than a rat. Rats are a pretty fatty animal, whereas birds are going to be a lot leaner. Birds got to fly, you know what I'm saying? So, and a lot of snakes eat birds, man. And a lot of snakes also eat other reptiles. I'm not going to tell you for sure that I know ball pythons are out there eating other reptiles. But, again, you know, you love reptiles, right? So you got a snake. Do you really want to feed it a reptile? And I get it. And another thing is rodents breed so readily. But, birds, things like that, they're out there. You can get frozen chicks, frozen quail, and stuff like that are becoming more prevalent in the reptile hobby as food. And that's something we're definitely going to implement for our snakes. Another thing is frequency. You know, of course, obviously, how often are you feeding them? And again, a growing snake, Billy is probably slowing down in growth, right? Being that she's almost 2 years old now. But Trips, our male ball python, who was a little tiny baby when he went through this big hunger strike of his, he still didn't lose a gram, right? It's not like his body was like, oh, no, I need food. I need it now. And he didn't eat for like 2.5 months. Lost, I think it was 3 grams. I think that's what he lost, which was a small percentage of his weight. So that's something to consider. You know, you want to raise your snake up. I get it. You can feed it more than once every 2.5 months, definitely. But it's just something to keep in mind that, let's say we were still feeding Billy a nice sized rat every week, and she just kind of kept getting fatter and fatter. Why not take some time off? And with that, though, I will say, so she's been off food maybe 2 weeks now, which isn't much of a fast, but it's more than we've been letting her. I'll probably give her another week and then feed her a nice small rodent, because it takes them a lot of calories. That's basically the most energy they're going to expend, except breeding and laying eggs, is going to be eating, right? So if I give her just a small little meal, that'll basically be like exercise for her, but also she's still getting food, so she's still able to grow and do what she has to do, and then probably reassess from there at that 3-week point with a small mouse, and we'll see how it goes. Okay, guys, so that's going to do it for today's episode. Billy is very offended that we're talking about her weight like this today, but we are not fat shaming Billy. Okay, we're just trying to keep her alive for as long as possible, and not only alive, but this is another thing that Dan brought up in the podcast, is that all reptiles are very good at hiding anything that's wrong with them. So who really knows how much suffering that snake was doing? And again, I'm really not hating on him. The fact that he even went out there and told this story and shared this story is, you know, it demands respect. And, you know, the same thing goes for me. Do I know that when we were really pounding food into Billy, she might have been suffering, you know, because these guys are not going to turn down food. A lot of these large constrictors are ambush predators. So food comes by, they're going to eat it because they don't know when that next meal is coming. So like I said, guys, I'm not doing a feeding guide. I'm not telling you, oh no, do it this much. Because number one, I'm not the authority on snakes and how to feed them. Number two, like I mentioned earlier, it's individual by individual. Like, I'm pretty confident we could keep feeding Trips every week, and he'll just kind of grow proportionally nice, not get too fat. But these are all things to keep in mind to kind of optimize the diet for your animal. You know, we like feeding because it's good. We think we're taking better care of them. And I don't blame you for that. Obviously, you want to feed your animals. But these guys are so different than mammals that you don't have to quite think that way, right? So like I said, that's going to do it for today's video. We hope you enjoyed. We hope you learned something. At least, you know, don't take it from me. Do some more research on the topic. These guys can literally go years without eating. And if you like this video, please consider subscribing to our channel, and we'll be posting more reptile content twice a week. Right, Billy? I'm Raph. This is Billy. You've been watching Red Ribbon Reptiles. We'll see you next time.